and you have to seriously reflect upon the effects of slavery and how it is the vestiges of that effect in the lives.
Your logic is manifestly attractive. But do we find that do we not find that there is a disjunction between what you say intellectually and what ends up being preached in the churches themselves? There seems to be more of an emphasis in the preaching of the church in terms of a direct and perhaps, what shall I say, a simplistic interpretation of the Bible as opposed to what you're doing now.
Well, I don't know that I have in many instances been regarded as revolutionary, but let's argue this. What happens if I trade a slave master in politics and a slave master in my socio-political environment, socio-political and economic environment, for a slave master in a theological environment? You see, that's the thing that I worried about South Africa when, even after apartheid, and maybe rightfully so, wrongfully so, but I worried about apartheid and about being released. Because I'm saying, when I look through the world and I look at theologians and I look at one of the things that theologians need is to be criticized by university, by the university blacks. The African intellectual ought to take a good shot at the authoritarianism that operates within the church.
How then do we make sure that your message, which transcends just the simplicity of I've got to transcend and go to heaven the following day, how then do we make sure that those that follow you and become lay preachers simply do not quote the verse and chapter as is without interpretation?
Well, what we do is we train them. In fact, I'm doing a thing now called The Cover because I want to deal with young ministers, and that's one reason I'm here talking to young ministers and business people so that I can make a link because of this disconnect. It's a great disconnect between what happens in pulpits and what happens on an everyday life. And we argue it. We argue that maybe our spirituality and our ethos, our ethics aren't connected. That we have one view as Christians within the parameters of the church, and the operation of these same Christians on an everyday walk seems to be totally disconnected. And it's because we've got the church thing right, but we've got life wrong. And there is a bridge between
the theology and the Bible don't seem to come together. But shall we hold it there and go for a short break? We shall come back to further discuss these issues. You're back with the African Diaspora, and you're still with us on SABC News International. Inspired by the relevance of what Bishop Noel Jones is talking about. Bishop, I find that, all of us notice that your current day leaders seem to gravitate towards the church, either in seeking the support of the churchgoers, or they see redemption in being part of the church. Which one would you say it is?
Well, what I would say, the question's sort of difficult to answer because I think it might be a little of both. But I am viewing the whole thing from a more practical standpoint now. I have to say that you want to go forward and not lose your core group. But at the same time, you have to venture out to a situation that is practical and that is applicable to solve the problems that our people have within the structure of their social environment. And in order to do that, you have got to equip them or empower them to operate outside of the church environment, which means that, to me, redemption now becomes normalcy. Because I believe that our people have lived so long on both sides of the Atlantic in an abnormal environment. And the psychological, the family, and all of the things that it has brought has left us in an abnormal operation. So before we go to transcendental, what we need to do is to make sure that we can bring people within the confines of the church to a state of normalcy. Normalcy in the way they think about their family, normalcy in the way they operate within the social environment that they're given, normalcy in the way they deal with their opportunities and education. And we have to bring them to that place. And I think that's redemption.
This new theology, if I were to call it that, perhaps it is not new, it's what theology should have been in the first instance. It teaches people to challenge their socio-economic environments. It teaches them to be alive within the sphere in which they find themselves, contrary to what is conventional theology, where there is a docility and acceptance of one's own circumstances, so to speak. Doesn't that bring into direct conflict with leadership, political leadership, where they would have otherwise preferred this docility?
Well, in my case, in LA, I happen to have the mayor's cell phone number. I happen to have Congresswoman Maxine Waters' cell phone number. I happen to have the cell phone numbers of most of my politicians. And the reason is, I get them elected. How do I get them elected? I have 20,000 members in a church, and they come and they speak in that church about the things that they're going to do socially. And many of them come back to the church after they're elected, not with a drive-by, but they come and sit and listen to the Word of God because it's applicable to their situation as they bridge the gap from where they are to the people who elect them. It's not docility. When I understand this, that God, when he makes man, he gives respect. He gives respect to man because he understands the intellect. He understands his cognitive energy. He understands his ability. Where we went wrong is we said that you should just speak it. And it's primarily a Pentecostal thing. It's primarily a TV evangelism thing, where you just speak it and it comes to pass. That's wrong.
Isn't that the modern church, though?
Yes, God spoke it. And in everything he put a seed. And if you're going to perpetuate his creation, then you have to sow a seed. What we have done in church is we've said to people, sow a seed in the ministry. And everybody runs and sows seeds in the ministry. But now, what we ought to say to people is, sow a seed in yourself.
What we're seeing, though, in this country is encroachment of what you might call evangelism, which is taking once again a trend of, what shall I say, agitated spirituality, as opposed to understanding the context in which such spirituality would have to take place.
See, the context in which such spirituality has to take place is that you've got to move it from the ethereal into the practical. What good is it for me just to go to church, have a wonderful time in the house of God, and not be able to transfer that to my everyday living, to my economic situation, to how I feel about myself, how I operate within the parameters of my social context? How do I view others who aren't like me? How do I bring my children up in an ambiguous environment that is caught somewhere between the comfort and the docility of a spiritual place and the aggressive operation that has to be a part of the social environment and the political and the corporate environment, where everybody's got to make sure that their lives work? I see both in the scriptures. I see understanding things that you don't have any control over and being able to live through that circumstance, and then moving aggressively in the things that you do have control over because God respects your intellect and your capacity to achieve. If that is not so, then we could never declare thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven, because he has to channel what happens on earth through us. He's looking for my mind. He's looking for my charisma. He's looking for my strength. He's looking for my determination. He's looking for my drive. And he expects me to go out. When I look at the parable of the sower and the seed, I'm not about to preach.